Hi Ved, what's up? Did you miss not talking last week on Soliloquy?
Definitely. And it's become so much a part of the lockdown routine. Funny thing happened.
Yeah, tell me.
So Modi, you must be knowing, Modi announced the lockdown package,
Yes.
so like a 20 lakh crore package.
Mm-hmm.
So I also saw that Tanmay Bhatt was doing a live stream
Mm-hmm.
while he was announced. So he just put the news on NDTV and he was pausing in the middle. He was stopping it and making his own comments. It was a pretty funny video. So I sent it to a friend of mine, and she's immediately like, "It might be funny, but I can't watch it because he's a sexual assaulter."
Okay. But he
I'm like,
wasn't an
bro,
assaulter, was
he's
he?
not exactly. He's not a sexual assaulter. He was implicated in a scandal because he was the CEO of AIB, and AIB didn't take action against someone who a victim had called out for a sexual offense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a completely different matter. And I explained that, and like he's not been implicated for it legally. And she's like, no, he's an assaulter. I'm like, the word assaulter has completely different meaning.
Yeah.
And you're not watching a good performance because of that. Like if you have a different principle objection, it's different. But her idea is, oh, he's an assaulter.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, there's a failure to appreciate nuance in these situations because of which you end up making so many people feel that the cancel culture as a whole
Yeah.
is fueled more by this lack of appreciation of nuance than by a genuine outcry against perpetrators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it also leads to this conversation around how blanket is cancel culture going to be because, and this is very relevant in what is happening with respect to the boys' locker room and
Yeah.
the whole news coming out and the follow up of that, where lots of people, also in the Kolkata circuit, have been called out. So I think this is where we need to talk about cancel culture more proactively and try and understand what exactly does it mean. Because you have a situation where there are two narratives, right? There is the narrative of the victim, which obviously is not something that we should disregard because it takes time, it takes a lot of effort to share something in the public forum. But at the same time, there is also the narrative of the so called perpetrator, which needs to be listened to at the very least before we arrive at a judgment. So, do you think there has been, you mentioned the lack of nuance. Could you sort of
Yeah,
qualify that
yeah.
and say what do you mean by lack of nuance in this respect?
I'll tell you why. Right? So there's a general feeling that calling people out, of course, with due respect to the idea, like appreciation of the idea that there are so many instances where there is a genuine offense and it's being called out, and we support that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many times when people who are largely neutral parties and in a more objective paradigm would have just chosen one side or gone into the facts of the case will actually just shift to the victim side because they feel, oh, that is someone breaking conformity, and that in itself must be appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
So the macro need to propagate the idea of calling people out might just have some collateral damage happening to people who haven't committed an offense or
Mm-hmm.
cases that aren't as grave as they're made out to be,
Mm-hmm.
but are being propagated that way. Because, for example, like in this friend situation I just gave you, right? I
Yeah.
think this person is unable to appreciate exactly what sexual assault means,
Mm-hmm.
or why some people, like different parties in the scandal, are liable to different degrees,
Yeah.
right? And you
Absolutely.
call them out for exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
Like on a slightly different parallel, look at Modi and the Godhra riots, right? There's still instances where people talk about 2002. Like
Yeah.
you don't know whether he was right or wrong, right? Legally you do, maybe actually we don't. But
Mm-hmm.
that still taints the work he does. And there are times when it has absolutely nothing to do with the policy that's coming out, and you'd rather criticize the policy on the face of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is an insufficient and a really bad way to start criticizing someone.
And I think this also creates the whole idea of cancel culture also creates false equivalencies in the sense that one
Mm.
argument that we keep hearing from, let's say, a lot of people who say that anybody who has been accused should be boycotted straight away. The idea is that by not boycotting them, you are not valuing the confessions or you're not valuing the statement of the victim, right? And I think that's a false equivalence because for the simple reason that I think as a society we can learn to appreciate and sympathize with the victim's story without going ahead and directly engaging in condemnation of the so-called perpetrator, at least until and unless there is sufficient proof. Look, in certain cases there is sufficient proof straight away. When you see certain text messages, then that is pretty clear what has happened. But there are also cases where the truth lies somewhere in between. and there are certain shades of grayness that covered the issue. So I think that sort of disentanglement of sympathy and condemnation on both sides of the narrative needs to be something we need to engage in. Another thing that you mentioned with respect to this Tanmay Bhatt example and sort of the Modi parallel that you drew as well is this inability to sort of separate the art from the artist, as it were. And a lot of these conversations became very relevant when Woody Allen was sort of accused in the sexual assault case. And I think these are questions we need to ask ourselves in a larger societal context, that when somebody produces something, whether it be a work of art, whether it be a policy, and it's out in the public domain, how much of their personality is imbibed in that particular work? And by not engaging with that work, are you not engaging with a larger part of society, because you're viewing that work as just constituting the individual who's produced it?
Fair, but you see, on the other hand, it's a very easy escape route for, especially for artists. If you spread the idea that the art must be separated from the artist, and hence if you're boycotting the artist, you don't need to boycott the artist.
Hmm.
Which leaves you with two questions, like on the face of it. The first is how then do you boycott the artist, right? Because this is the greatest and in some cases the only way to attack that person, right? You find a lot, they are relatively in many ways more stoic than the rest of the world. If you attack an industrialist on a personal level and not just his work or his company, it's a different story. You can still bring them down, but you can't do that to an artist or attacking the artist. The second part is how then do you create a sympathy or let's still let people get that feel good factor from consuming his art? Because one way or the other, if you're a name, right, what you do inevitably carries that label with you. Whether you're like a clothes designer or you're a movie director or an actor, right? When I'm watching Shah Rukh Khan on the screen, vis-a-vis if I'm watching a random, like, no good actor who's just come up yesterday on the screen, I very definitely, regardless of how well he's playing that role, relate to him as Shah Rukh Khan. Right? And even that film is, like, given the marketing they do these days, builds on his persona in the promotion.
Yes.
So if you're buying into the film, you are essentially buying into the persona building they're doing as a part of the whole promotional package. So it's not that easy to clinically de-link one from the other.
Yes.
So especially in this case, we need to not go down that slippery slope of saying that, look, you can boycott one but not boycott the other, right? But though, of course, I agree with the opposite side. I just think there is no straight answer, like there is no definite answer to it.
Yes, exactly. And I'm also not advocating the fact that you should, not go ahead and boycott the art or not go ahead and sort of engage with these people. But what I'm trying to say is that there needs to be more of a discussion, like, because what happens is whenever a name comes in that has been embroiled in any of these accusations or any of these issues, largely of the sexual nature, there is this blanket certificate of disengagement that, okay, this person has been accused, so that's it. There is no more conversation around this. It's just bad. What happened with the boys' locker room incident, of course, I think it was 4 or 5 days ago that a report came out that the rape messages, which ended up attracting most of the attention when the initial chats were leaked, actually came from a woman, actually came from a girl who's like 16, 17 years old. And then suddenly what happened is that the identity politics that was happening with respect to, sort of trying to corner boys and corner men and corner abuses in general and all the hashtags around not all men and yes all men and all of that, suddenly got a fillip, and then it became about women, and then it became about calling out so-called pseudo-feminists who'd been trying to weaponize the issue through the lens of feminism. And that, I think that's really sad to see at one level, because obviously we understand that in a patriarchal society that India still is, there is a lopsided nature of power. There is no doubt about that. And there are patriarchal mechanisms that facilitate something like a boys' locker room. But don't you think that every issue that becomes an issue of sexual assault, harassment, abuse of power, to necessarily see that issue through a lens of patriarchy versus feminism is to give the issue an ideological grounding which it does not always necessitate? So what I'm trying to say, if I sort of phrase it differently, is that a girl can do something bad, a boy can do something bad, and that does not necessarily need to attach itself with the larger framework of feminism or the larger framework of patriarchy. So if a woman calls out a guy, or rather, tries to test his character as this girl was doing through all those rape comments, that action in and of itself is not an insult to feminism, and nor is the boys' locker room and a sort of insult to all men or all boys who grow up in a particular environment of elite schools.
I'll tell you, I know people who will respond to this by saying that, oh, she's a girl. Why is she taking pictures of herself to begin with?
Hmm.
A, right? B, I know comparatively less conservative people, right, who are somewhere in the middle ground, and they'll say, oh, she's a girl. She shouldn't have been interacting so much with boys, right? And you'll find this even amongst educationists today.
Yeah.
It's so funny. The third is people like us, right, who are like, no, we should appreciate the nuance, discuss the topic. And we also know like people who would want to make it from the get-go about an ideology conflict. Now, I
Yeah.
think the first two need to be discarded, right? The third and fourth are both correct in their own way.
Hmm.
I think when we're talking about how you appreciate the nuance, a big problem is that the facts are never going to be clear enough because there is so much of a like if you notice even the reporting and the way in which they suddenly reported that no, it was a girl who did it, right? And the absence of a full-fledged investigation and the speed at which somehow they came to this conclusion is very funny, right? Like there's something rotten there, so you don't completely realize why they've done it. The fourth example which I give you, I think there are a lot of instances where, especially to counter these conservative mindsets of the first and second example, you need to spread this idea that you're at war with patriarchy. Because unless you go out and very clearly delineate that we are at war, you are not going to get that level of change. Now, what I have not been able to answer yet is whether it is okay to get some collateral damage in the form of some people who
Exactly.
might not be that patriarchal, who might be
Yeah.
victims themselves. But you have to agree that, especially in like a rural Haryana or a rural UP, people have to go out and call the war out, right? If you don't do that, you can't collectivize action, right? That the call to action loses some kind of vigor if you're not telling them that, look, you must move with your eyes and ears open, and there is a very silent form of sexism which is happening. Because you might just be told that, oh, dress properly, I'm being protective of you, right? And that happens. I've seen the most modern youth telling their girlfriends that, oh, look, you must dress properly, right? And I'm telling you how to dress. And I don't think those girls, like, I've seen girls who won't even recognize it as a form of sexism, but as a form of very caring protection.
Yeah.
And that is also a problem. So how bad are we towards the enemy of sexism is a question. But there's no doubt that we have to say that there are large enemies to sexism and that we are at war with them.
Yeah, and I think it's a very complex issue, right? So there are plenty of knots that we have to navigate while discussing cancel culture and calling out on all of that. But I think one fundamental truth which we need to sort of come to terms with as a society is that people can indulge in sexist practices without being an outright sexist themselves. Now, what I mean by that is, again, it's sort of paralleling what happens with racism. So, a person might commit a racist act, but that does not make the person a racist. What I mean by that again is the act in and of itself is something that's open to interpretation by multiple players in the social scene, right? So there is the person who's committed the act. There are people who are perceiving the act all across the board. So if I give a simple example, sometime in I think October or November last year, there was this footballer for this club Manchester City in England, a Portuguese footballer, who posted a picture of this chocolate company which had this cartoonish representation of a black figure. It's like a figurine, right? He posted that picture and he drew a parallel with that picture with one of his teammate who was also at Manchester City and who's a black player. Now that received outright condemnation from various channels of social media because they were saying that this is a racist. This is a racist equation that's been created and this is outright racist, and they were condemning the player. They were asking for him to be banned. But the player in question, who was compared by his teammate, he laughed it off and said it's a joke. So what I'm trying to say here is that the player who actually posted that picture and made that comparison may be a perfectly decent human being, which a lot of people have cited by saying that he's multilingual and he's got a cosmopolitan culture, and even at the football club it's a cosmopolitan culture. So that's fine. I mean, it may exonerate the player and his character, but it does not take away the fact that what he has done is still an act that is racist. So that distinction between the act and the actor is something I think we need to understand as a society in a larger context. So, for example, a lot of times when I was in Kolkata, when I was on a bus, and Kolkata buses, are really crowded. So often, if there was a woman, and of course those bus lines are segregated, men and women seats are segregated. At times when there was let's say a female passenger who was standing in the vicinity and I was sitting, I would often get up and I would just give the seat to them, right? And only in hindsight have I realized that this is also a form of sexist behavior, because you're sort of assuming that that woman who's perfectly abled otherwise is necessarily weaker or needs that seat more than you do. And this is in many ways a chivalrous outgrowth of patriarchy. It's like soft patriarchy, right? Or like opening the door for a woman while she's coming out of a car or something like that. So, and these things I don't think necessarily make me a sexist, but the actions in and of themselves which have been committed by me can still be called out as sexist. So that distinction between the act and the actor needs to come into play, because these are layered issues. These are issues that we have been conditioned by a larger society without consciously realizing that, okay, this is bad, this is good, this falls under this paradigm, this falls under that paradigm. So I think we need to be more cautious with labeling even when we're calling out people on social media. But one other thing, just to move this in a sort of different direction. Now, we live in very complex times, as I said, right? And especially with, let's say, all the hyper interactive nature of social media, there is a lot of abuse that's going on. There's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of emotional manipulation, there's a lot of toxic behavior. Do you think there is a threshold that we need to keep in mind before calling people out on social media? What has happened is that in the wake of the boys' locker room, I have had a few conversations with people who have spoken about, instances that they have experienced, where they have experienced toxic behavior from either their partners or like family members. But they don't want to call it out because they don't see it as severe enough. So, what I'm trying to sort of get at is, do you think we can actually draw a line of that severity, or where
No,
it
no,
crosses a
no,
threshold?
I'll tell you why. Impossible. I'll tell you why. There can be no, at least in my like limited understanding of the concept, there can be no universally defined or even community-wise defined line, because there are two factors like which the threshold, as for the lack of better word, is a function of, right?
Hmm.
The first thing it's a function of is the situation in itself. What is concept? Like, is the bodily cue, like we were only discussing a few days back, right?
Yeah.
Is the bodily cue a concept or is it not? Right? And like if you make yes and no a consent, like the threshold for consent, where does it leave the entire idea of how bodily cues are very often seen as invitations, right? And like you can't discount the fact that they are like, just seduction happens in many forms, and like just, or even invitation to conversations, and like the general feel of the room is a very great parameter by which people judge how things are going to proceed, and which might not always be wrong. But like we just need to give people some kind of an empathy so that they don't sense the room in the wrong way, right? And that's not an easy thing to do, because there's a lot of subjectivity involved in where you come from and how you judge the same situation, like we discussed in love conversation, as opposed to how the other person sees the same situation, primarily defines whether you see a yes as a no or a no as a yes, right? In the absence of a clear verbal thing. The second thing it's a function of is just the equation between the two people, which I don't think is something you can define universally. For example, as soon as you were saying partner, I thought of like other male counterparts which you could have, right? If I say brother, or if I say father, or if I say son, or like neighbor, whoever, right? How do you define what is a good touch and what is a bad touch with these kind of people, right? Like, and it varies from community to community. Like I know in specific communities in India which would find a more liberal form of touch, or if you just touch a niece, good enough. And some communities which are so conservative that if you touch a niece, it's not a good touch. Right? It's not something they would look forward to even like. So you can't put that in stone. And the minute we do that, which brings me back to your bus example, right? The minute we do that, you start imposing norms, some of which will be seen as people who don't need them as sexist, and some of which will be followed so blindly that they serve no purpose. For example, you are conditioned to somehow intuitively stand up when you're in the bus, right? Even though you are far more aware than, say, the general Kolkata bus taker, like someone who's commuting on the bus, on both sexism and these issues, and whether like chivalry is a gray area with sexism. But we need that norm in many places, because we know places where if women weren't given that seat, and because women are lesser in number on that bus when it goes from route A to route B, you know for a fact they'll get jostled about and touched in a way you don't want. And there are areas where if you don't allow women that seat in a Haryana or a UP, they will not get that seat. Right? And they will specifically be told they will specifically not be given that seat. So you can't deny the idea that there are places where oppression exists and these measures are needed. But you also can't deny that literally down to the individual level, it's so subjective, the applicability of these rules differ. So the more we try to define things which are largely interpersonal in nature, stuff like thresholds, the more we end up enforcing things which we don't have to, right? And that leads to so many spirals into the wrong directions. What you should do is you should teach people to, people are just going to be seen as theoretically as having offended that defined threshold, right? Which we don't want. Because many times there are these problems, there are like misunderstandings, and what you should do is let people know that this is when you call out A, B, this is when you see if it was okay given the relation you share with the person, C, this is what you are going towards, and D, this is where you realize that after some investigation, we've concluded the victim was wrong. But you can't deny that the victim has to be given some kind of an upper hand, especially in India.
Yes,
Because there is an underlying patriarchy.
exactly. But I think also all of those points that you said, as relevant as they are, there is also somewhere down the line the need to understand that a narrative that comes about with a person confessing on social media and sort of calling somebody out, there is a subtle difference between sharing a story that involves toxicity and sharing a story that involves calling out somebody who has been so outrageous that they need to be excommunicated or boycotted, as it were, right? So I think somewhere down the line, we have what I have seen from various posts and with people commenting and stuff like that, is that we are conflating the two. So there have been situations when people have done bad things, but those bad things, are they so bad that those people concerned
I get
don't
it.
deserve
Yeah.
a redemption? Or what has been even worse is that the so-called calling out has not really taken place so much by the victim as it has by these supposedly keyboard warriors who have gone on the comment section and lambasted those individuals who've been accused of, various offenses. So that is also, it's not just an overcompensation, but it creates a situation where it's a trial by social media, where reputations are at stake, where individual identities are transgressing with the whole social framework of what we consider to be right and wrong. And it's a slippery slope, because if you start calling out somebody who has done something bad to your friend on the comment section, without understanding all the emotional subtleties that have been involved, which the friend and the victim in this case can understand very well, are you not entering into a framework where you just should not, right? So I think it is just murky territory, and perhaps then there needs to be more education about this. But sort of jumping tracks a little bit, I what I have also seen with respect to all this call out culture is that I see this as an extension of political correctness, and the kind of political correctness that has become the domain of the liberal left in today's times, where you have to use certain terms that are preferable or that are so-called sanitized. So and that is fine in certain cases, right? I think that is fine in certain cases when, let's say, the use of the N word is something that's been debated a lot as to who should have power over using the N word. And in a lot of instances, it's been said that if you happen to be a member, if you happen to be a black, then you have the legitimacy to use the N word, because all the sort of condescending connotations that historically are associated with the N word don't apply to you if you as a black person use the word. And I think that's a fair argument, right? But there are also situations when people go to the extent of saying that you can't call a fat person fat, right? That you have to call them overweight, as it were. Or how do you decide if somebody is ugly? You can't call somebody ugly. So, do you think that, where do you see this sort of tenuous connection between political correctness and the call out culture that we see today? Or do you think there's a connection at all?
Yeah. No, I think there is a connection, right? But in localized situation, like you again can't say that there's always a connection. So firstly, on the idea of how these keyboard or like these social justice warriors and all, they come out and they blanketly take a side without going into the facts of the case, right? I think a big problem there is, for example, where this Richard Burr, the Senate committee leader, if I get his post right, just resigned in the US.
Yeah.
Because he's been accused in the scandal, not proven to have been guilty, but accused,
Yes.
and he's had to resign from a top post at a crucial time. And you see this in many places. Like people who've been called out for some kind of toxicity are forced to resign or give up posts which they might just be doing well in, which I really don't see how that works out unless there's something we're really missing, right? Because this is just reversing the idea of innocent until proven guilty, which is where
Yeah.
I can very like I take 100% stance against blanket calling out and beginning to reprimand the person just because they have been called out, right? Which is it's too powerful a tool you're giving to in the hands of anyone who ever wants to bring you down from a post you're at.
Hmm.
I think that's terrible. On the other hand, I think political correctness does feed in very well into this cancel culture because let me explain through like the concept of a few cultures that you find around the world.
Yeah.
First thing comes to mind is the law of Jante. The law of Jante is a culture in Nordic countries, some few centuries old, where they value conformity a lot. So anyone who's speaking too loud or speaking too much about how wealthy they are, how what they've achieved in office or in their academic fields, or someone who's boasting too much, is boycotted. They're not called to parties, not called to social gatherings, right? And you must at all times be humble. And now it's also seen in the absolute form as people wanting to be self-deprecating. People have taken, like, at least the younger generation. So the Nordic countries, by the way, are known a lot for their hospitality, right? They're one of the best places on earth to go to. In all humanities parameters, they're very high. And they're very, in general, happy society. The younger generation takes strict opposition to this because they're like, this is just like stopping people from being able to express themselves as they think they've done something well, or being able to promote themselves through conversation in a social gathering, which is very important, right? And I think this problem arises from the same thing, cancel culture and things like opposition to John Logan.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want that age-old conformity of not being able to speak about something you want to speak about, right? Because it's not viewed by your immediate social circle or by the place you are in as politically correct. So it's more of just some kind of resentment against what has been defined to be politically correct and is hence some kind of a pressure on you, right, or some kind of a limitation on you, as opposed to you actually wanting to, with the full nuances of the case, go and talk about it, right? So it might not be as much as the facts of the case itself as it is about you wanting to call out the entire system of political correctness and what generations before you have told you must do to be politically correct.
Yeah.
Second culture, which I find very relevant, is there's a culture in Australia called the tall poppy syndrome. So it's like when the poppy stalk grows too tall, you cut it off. So like they metaphorically put into social lives, and for years they follow this. When someone becomes big for the boot, or when they talk too highly of themselves, or they behave in a very high-handed manner, you cut them short. You clip their wings, right? And you boycott them, or you show them their place in a conversation. And that's a very well-accepted practice, so that people don't become rude to each other, or like people don't generally become displeasing as company. That I think has major problems, right? Even though it will stop you from stop you generally from displeasure being caused in gatherings. It has major problems in terms of limiting how you want to talk, because there is no foolproof way of remaining within politically correct boundaries and still expressing what you think is correct or what you think needs to be expressed. So I think the problem becomes when we don't have that fine line, which also is not possible to define, between the need to express and the need to conform to what is politically correct.
What happens as a result is when you are buying into an environment of political correctness, it's only your vocabulary that is changing. Your instincts and emotions are in some ways getting suppressed. So if you want to, let's say, call a fat person fat, in public you might be using the word overweight, but in your mind you still have the notion of what fat means, and you are still in your mind calling that person fat while sort of presenting a sanitized profile. So I think a better way to go about this, at least with respect to the so-called lighter offenses, as it were, like the whole idea of labeling somebody as fat or ugly, is whether or not you think that the recipient of that comment is comfortable with it. And if you feel that that person has told you explicitly that, look, I don't like being called fat, or I don't like being called ugly, even in jokes, even in passing references, then that is something you need to take into account and change not only your vocabulary, which is what most people are doing under the garb of political correctness, but also the way you understand that representation. Because obviously there is no inherent malice attached to the word fat, or there is no inherent malice attached to the word ugly. It's what those
Mhm.
words begin to connote in different minds and different interpretative spaces that we need to take
Mhm.
greater account of. What ends up happening with the whole cancel culture, calling out, and all of that is there are certain instances where you appropriate concepts and experiences, right? So,
Mhm.
and I think that's fundamental of any human
Yes, yes,
experience,
yes.
because
Mhm.
what is harassment? What may be harassing to you may not be harassing to me, right? If let's say somebody says something about my masculinity. I remember when I was told once that my handshake is too weak for a man, and
Mhm.
that I mean, I did not take any offense. I just laughed it off. But I heard a
Mhm.
similar instance a few days ago of another friend who shared that, and he felt that he was being attacked and he was being offended. So offense and
Mhm.
harassment and all these things which do not have any particular sort of semantic boundary, so to speak, are things that will always be appropriated. But we need to create that sort of dichotomy in our minds where we are able to understand that, okay, this is a particular story with a particular narrative, with a particular use of the concept, and then these are the facts. So when you have certain
Mhm.
text messages which tell you exactly what the perpetrator is trying to do, it's much clearer then. But I think when we are reading these narratives on like Facebook or Instagram or wherever it is, this understanding that different words can have different contexts and need to be thereby interpreted differently is very, very important.
Fair. No, see, I also think that needs to be taken in a more. That's perfectly fine, right? The only small change to that is that needs to be again localized so that you see it in different ways in different places.
Hmm.
There are places in which setting it out as legislation or as a rule for society that you must tiptoe your way around some words and some ways of talking is 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 a good indicator of what kind of change you want in the long run. And children who are going to grow up learning from grade one, grade two, that look, you can't say the N word and you can't say the A to Z word, right?
Hmm.
And how you talk to certain people and call them overweight and call them fat are going to grow up with a greater degree of sensibility.
Yeah.
So you are, in effect, the legislation is propagating more sensibility. So that's fair. And also people are going to normalize it if
Hmm.
there is adherence to it.
Yeah.
What this shouldn't do is like don't bring a bill C-16 to India, right? Don't
Yes,
bring
we'll
a
get to
gender
that. Yeah.
neutrality bill to
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
So as soon as you need to identify how badly out of sync or how well in sync is the intended law with the
Hmm.
society is going towards it, because you need to identify the level of sexism or patriarchy or lack of sensibility towards a particular issue
Hmm.
before you set the rule out. And
Yes.
that the rule you're setting out is the baby step one and the baby step two, and not the baby step of nth or hundredth number, right? And as long as we're
Hmm.
doing that, we are on a good track to gradually establishing like a stage-wise sensibility, which is, I think, what should be the norm.
Yes.
Because it's better than, like, as you said, people in a workspace, right? Like, so within a workspace, there are going to be people who are the social minority of wherever that space is located, and
Hmm.
people who are the social majority, right? Take a Muslim and a Hindu working in a Wipro office in Bangalore, right? And or in Nagpur, right? And suddenly you're going to find that the minority is having to tiptoe their way around many situations because sorry, the majority is having to tiptoe their way around many situations because they don't feel it's correct for them to talk about many of the things they would have openly talked about, or are
Hmm.
not sure about how insensitive they'll come across to be if they talk to the minority person that way, right? And that's the problem because I think that's hindering somewhere it's putting a limitation on the way a more effective work relationship can form, and like by consequence, a more effective personal relationship can form, right? So if it's a social conversation limiter and a rapport forming limiter, then I don't think it serves any purpose at all because
Yeah.
it's counterproductive to begin with.
Hmm. And just to sort of give a bit of context to those listeners who may not be aware of what
Yep.
Bill C-16 is. So, Bill C-16 is a legislation that
Uh,
was introduced by the Canadian government, to which Jordan Peterson, an academic and clinical psychologist, had great opposition to, and that was sort of the moment he burst into fame. Because Jordan Peterson said that addressing transgenders or addressing individuals with gender neutral pronouns was going against freedom of speech. Now, that's a complicated debate. That's not a debate we are going to enter today. But I think as we wrap this conversation up about cancel culture, about the different shades of opinion, about distinguishing between art and artist, at the end of the day, it all comes down to freedom of speech, does it not? Because you are, on one hand, empowering people and giving them the license to speak, and at the same time, there is society that is regulating interpretations and regulating the mechanism through which this speech can operate. As you rightly said, I think it's about localizing these phenomena, and not just localizing with respect to socio-political contexts, but even within personal contexts. So there may be certain people that you speak to on a regular basis among your friends and among your like daily contacts, some of whom may not like particular words, some of whom may not like to be addressed in a particular way. And that is where we need to sensitize ourselves that look, vocabulary is something that is capacious, but at the same time, vocabulary is something that we need to customize when talking to different individuals. Like, for example, let's say, I see all these Instagram comments, okay, on uh, pictures of like my female friends where people have said, oh, you're looking hot, or you're looking pretty, and all of these things. So these words may mean different things to different people. And in one context, I might be okay to sort of substitute the word pretty with hot, but in another context, it may not be, because maybe that person perceives it to be an objectification. So more sensitized vocabulary, I think, is perhaps one way of going towards a society where at least there is relatively better understanding of all these different concepts that we spoke about today.
There's a twist you can put to that, right?
Hmm.
What if there is an overtly sensitive reception of the word hot?
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, there can be an overtly pervert like expression when you're using the word hot. So there's literally no way of defining it. So what
I'm saying
if we move it towards legislation, what's going to happen is we're going to like towards a more defined rule. Is that we're going to boycott and taboo the word hot out, right? So another way to look at it is for both with like over and above what we discussed, is just be more eloquent, right? Just promote the idea that have a larger vocabulary, right? Now be able to express what you have to without going into a word that might mean something else and different from what you want to express. And if you mean you're looking good, just say you're looking good. And that the word hot has specifically defined meaning. For a very simple example is people say $10, $15, right?
Yeah.
$10 refers to dollars. So when people go to Puchka wala and come back from buying a Puchka and say it cost me $10, and like that didn't cost
so
you $10.
Wouldn't have had the Puchka if it cost $10.
Exactly. Don't take it out of context.
Huh.
Yeah, so just like general eloquence within people, I think is a very plausible solution to the idea of misinterpreted words and like oversensitivity on both the expression and consumption ends of the word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. But what I was trying to say, as again, this is a relevant point that you make, but I don't think people sort of increasing their vocabulary or eloquence is something that's going to happen anytime
it's a long-term change. It's a long-term
yeah,
change.
yeah. But what I'm also saying is that instead of just completely getting rid of words like hot and all of these sort of adjectives that might be misinterpreted, it's also the realization that if somebody tells you categorically, and I know that this does not happen in all the cases, like maybe a girl won't go ahead and text you and say that, look, I don't like the fact that you addressed me by this adjective. But if it happens, then I think that needs to be taken on board, and that is where you can't get into an argument saying, no, I meant this when I said hot. I did not mean to objectify you when I said hot. I think that's where
of course,
the person who has received that comment, the recipient's authority should be the final authority, and instead of a semantic debate of what the word really meant. We'll be entering more contentious territory over the next few weeks, because we aim to take a few more hotly debated concepts and hopefully
oh no, you can't say that, right? Don't leave it to the listeners for the receiving end. We might just mean different things when we go into these controversial topics. Might be consumed in different ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think just as we end, it's important to sort of also take a step back and see this in the larger scheme of things. I think it's a great thing that people are coming out with their narratives. People are calling people out on social media and sharing their stories. But again, just the way you use the two words, share your story and call people out, there is a gulf of difference between the two. And it's sort of understanding that each narrative maps a certain tenuous territory between these two different worlds, as it were, of sharing stories and of calling somebody out. And they can be mutually inclusive, they can be mutually exclusive as well. But they are not uniform, is I think the fundamental realization that
definitely
there are no rules that apply.
We support, exactly. I think what we're trying to get at throughout was that we support any expression that's bringing some kind of empowerment, right? But we think that the consumption on the other end by people
Hmm.
should be in terms of every detail and every nuance of that expression.
Yeah.
And not then the empowerment doesn't mean you blanketly judge it and think that the expressor is right.
Hmm. Yes.
Right? So we support the feeling it brings.
Hmm. So it's about having that
Yeah.
focus that a particular
Mm.
account brings, but it's also about having the perspective to understand that this account does
Mm.
not exist in isolation.
Definitely. Very
Yeah.
true.
All right. So on that note, I think we'll call it a day, and next week
Chalo,
we'll be
yeah.
back. Take care.
Take care, bro. See you.
Chalo. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Hi, guys. Thank you for listening to this episode of That's What We Said. Ved and I realized that we raised many contentious issues during this episode, and that most of you feel very strongly about these issues. So do go to the comment section, engage, and tell us where you felt that we should have engaged more, things that you feel you disagree with, and maybe areas you felt we resonated what you've been thinking about. Ved and I will continue to bring up contentious issues and engage what we feel are topics that have an urgent appeal in today's society. Click on the bell icon to subscribe and receive the latest updates regarding That's What We Said. Till the next time, take care.